Welcome to the Puzzle of Us podcast. I'm your host, Chelsea Petersen, the owner of Cache Valley Counseling and therapist here who's been doing therapy for almost over 15 years, with lots of experience with lots of different relationships, individuals, couples, and just wanting to share a little bit of that knowledge with you. Today, our topic is helping your kids with their back to school anxiety. I was just thinking about this and preparing for this podcast, and I thought about, when I walked into Walmart a few days after the 4th of July and all of their summer stuff had been moved from the front of the store and all of it had been replaced with school stuff. There was a pit in my stomach of like, no, I love my kids going to school. I love that they get the opportunity to go to school. And we are in the heat of summer and I'm not quite ready to give up summer yet. But that anxiety or that stress that we're talking about is what we're really talking about with our kids today. And how to help them manage that, how to help them have a successful school year despite worries, anxieties that might get in the way. Anxiety and going back to school is normal. It is totally normal, and many kids, every year there's change of friends, change of classes, change of learning, change of environment, sometimes a change of completely different schools. Will I forget my locker combination? There's all sorts of, every single age group, there is anxiety and unknowns and uncertainty with what might come in the upcoming school year. So anxiety, a little bit of anxiety is totally appropriate and totally normal. And today we're going to talk a little bit about how to manage just the normal anxiety that happens, as well as maybe some of the bigger anxiety that might get in the way of their learning, get in the way of social interactions and things like that. First thing that is really the most beneficial thing for your child to do, for you to be able to help your child, is really to understand where it's coming from, to understand the triggers, understand what it is that they're really afraid of. Help them break it down. Have the conversations of, are you worried about friends? Are you worried about your teacher? What questions keep running in your head? What if my teacher doesn't like me? What if I don't have any friends in my class? Those are normal anxiety-driven questions that are saying, I don't know all of the answers. And what will I do in those situations? So it can be really helpful just to talk through some of those. What could you do? What have you done in the past if they are experienced school students? If they aren't experienced school students, how do we make friends? What could you do? Even going through, your kindergartner, first graders that are still learning, how do I interact with people? Would be going up to them and saying, hi, my name is Chelsea, and I like to play on the monkey bars. Would you like to play on the monkey bars with me? Going through those experiences just to they help give them words to those moments that they're most afraid of. Can be really, really helpful. And we'll talk about specifics of things like that. But those are the anxieties that are normal, natural, and just a little tidbit to help if you've got those younger kids that aren't quite sure what to do with all these scary questions that are rolling around in their brain. Common signs. How do I know if my kid is anxious? How do I know what to look for? Oftentimes there'll be, emotional meltdowns. They'll be more emotional than usual. Sometimes can't go to sleep, or can't stay asleep during the night, or waking up really early. So disruptions of sleep, eating patterns, disruption of emotional mood or regulation can be a sign of that there might be some anxiety going on if they're not able to talk to you about it. Some kids are able to put words to, I'm kind of worried about this, I'm scared about that. What if I don't have friends? What if I get lost? What if, some people can put those words to it, but those other things are signs that you can look for that might tell you that your kid has some anxiety going on. Some things that might provide sources of anxiety that might be happening for your kids. There's definitely social pressures, there's academic expectations, there's parental expectations. spoken or unspoken, and changes in routine, changes of friends, changes of schools, things like that, just the normal anxiety of things. But some kids put a lot of their own expectations on, I want to do well, or I'm taking so many AP classes or concurrent enrollment classes, and they put a lot of that pressure on them of I want to do well in school. So that can provide some anxiety for them. Some kids don't care about school, they don't care about the academics, they care more about the social aspect. Both are normal and fine. Some care about both, right? And there's just two sources that creates a lot of pressures, social pressures and academic expectations. You also throw in sports or after school involvement, drama, band, whatever it might be. There can be expectations of level of performance when it comes to high school aged children. And then just even young kids, right? Sometimes not being able to perform, or that hearing their teachers say, that they're delayed, or they're not quite up to the level of reading that they need to be, or the level of math that they need to be, or they need a little extra support or help. That can create some anxiety for some kids. Again, some kids don't care, and it's like, well, I don't care. That's not a big deal for them. So those are just some of those things that you want to pay attention to, and you'll want to look at some of the behavior changes, right? If they're having a hard time adjusting routines, if there's major changes in eating or sleep, those are things that can be indicative of some anxiety going on. So now how do you really recognize, triggers? What's triggering the anxiety? What's it coming from? I often love to have kids journal or tell me a story. Young kids, if they have a good imagination still and they haven't really lost it, they can be really imaginative. Sometimes they'll tell you a story about Johnny the dinosaur that got scared going to get a drink from the water. And that could tell you, again, without interpreting of like, oh, do you ever feel scared, right? Using them of like, tell me a story, and being able to then ask questions. When else does the dinosaur feel scared? How does the dinosaur then ask for help? What does the dinosaur need to feel like he's not alone? All of those questions can stem from an imagination of a child, and the support of a parent being able there to help them. If you can't identify where the trigger really is coming from, right? If it's, I don't know if they're worried about social pressures, I don't know if they're worried about the school, sometimes just even sitting down and playing with them, with figurines, Barbies, army men, farm toys, like it doesn't matter what it is, but oftentimes they will play out their emotions in play. And so being able to use those times to ask those questions can be really helpful in finding the triggers and getting more information about what's really going on for them. If they're a little bit older, encouraging them to journal and write down the questions that are bobbing around in their head, their anxieties, their worries. Again, just those things you want to be able to identify the trigger, identify where it's coming from, identify what is the worry or the unknown that is scary. What is scary about the thing that's scary, right? Is it, I'm not going to have any friends, therefore people are going to bully me, then I'm not going to have fun, I'm not going to have anyone to play with, and people are going to point me out on the playground, then, right? Whatever it might be, there's a lot of layers to these unknown or unexpected questions. And so helping them find clarity is really, really, really helpful in managing anxiety. So I want to dive into a little bit of the strategies for easing back into school and easing the anxiety a little bit. We talked about this in a different podcast, but parents often have their own anxieties and own worries about what the school year will hold for their child. And some parents do a better job of managing their own anxieties, and some don't do such a great job. So if you are a parent who is finding themselves also having their own anxiety about your kid going to school, tune into the other podcast and kind of get some ideas of how to help soothe your own anxiety so that you aren't putting those anxieties on your children, and that you can really show up well for your children. So children need a roadmap. They need to know how to manage the discomfort, the uncomfortable. I think us as parents a lot of times want to shield our kids from ever having anything uncomfortable happen to them. And if we can save them from that, or if we can shield them from that in some way, of course we want to do that. However, we're doing them a disservice because they don't learn how to manage the discomfort in those moments. And so being able to help them figure out what works for them to be able to get through the discomfort is really ideal here, and is a way that you can help them learn how to manage their anxiety. So, we've got young kids that are worried about leaving mom. Sometimes, we've taken t-shirts of mom and put it in their pocket and sprayed it with their perfume, that whenever you're missing mom, you can pull it out, you can smell it. Then mom's there with you, right? A book that I love is called The Invisible String, that talks about how our hearts are connected, even though we're miles apart or far apart, that when they're at school, we still feel what they feel, we still care about them, we still love them, they're still attached to them. And so that invisible string is a way of, we always read it to our kids before we go to school. It's part of our going to school routine. We pull out that book and read it just so that they can be reminded that we're going to always be attached no matter where we are in the world. And just helping them be able to find ways to ease that anxiety, whatever it is, right? For little kids, like I mentioned, it might be being away from home. Older kids, it might be questions of, will I fit in? Will I have friends? Will people like me? Will I be able to remember my locker combination? Those sort of things. And so it's going through strategies of, okay, what could you do to remember your locker strategy or your locker combination? Where could you put it in your phone that you're going to remember it? Can you text it to me every day for the next 5 days so that you just have it memorized? Whatever it might be, right? The locker combination probably isn't a big thing anymore because they all have phones. But back in my day, when we didn't have a phone to put information in, it was kind of scary of, I'm rushing to class and I might not remember my locker combination. So again, there's lots of anxieties and worries, particularly for teenage kids, academic pressures, their own pressures that they put on themselves, social expectations. They're really leaving the nest at this time and wanting to fit in with people outside of their own little home-based nest. And so what does that look like? What does that take? What does that mean for me? If any of you have seen the Inside Out 2, the new Inside Out that just came out, it's a great example of a lot of anxiety that can come in and pretty much wreck and destroy everything that has been built and systems that have been built and put into place. So if you haven't seen it, I would highly recommend it. But it's very good and very helpful in explaining anxiety, understanding anxiety. If your kid has anxiety, I would highly recommend you read or you watch the movie and then talk about it. What does that look like for them, and have them personalize it? What are the things that their anxious mind says to them? What's the questions that they hear? And you could have them journal as well. Especially with older kids, journaling, getting it out kind of gives it less power and allows them to be able to feel some sense of control over that. And being able to manage the anxiety really helps create and build resilient kids and confident kids. And that's really, what we want in life. Not overly confident kids, but confident enough that I can do this. I'm okay. Securely attached kids. One of the other things that can be really, really helpful in easing back to school anxiety is us as parents really being able to create a positive environment, especially October, November, when we've heard it all and it's the same old noise every morning. the same arguments. It can be really hard to stay positive, but if we can maintain and create positive environment, reinforcing that they can do this, that skill building is happening, that they are growing confidence, that they can do this. And self-affirmations is a great part of this. So if you can teach your kids how to give themselves kind of a pat on the back. Again, there's going to the extremes of then becoming so self-absorbed that they can't be there for other people, but the likelihood of that happening is very, very slim. And so being able to have your kids have confidence of like, I got this, I can do this, I can do hard things, I'm brave, I'm strong, I am smart, I am funny, like can help them start to believe those things about themselves. And then that's how they show up in environments with other people. And ultimately that is, what we want.
Hey, Chelsea here. I wanted to tell you about our Cultivating Connections course. This course helps seasoned couples not just survive their marriage, but actually thrive in it. This course will take you through all the steps needed to reconnect with your lifelong love. Almost all of the couples that have taken this course tell me that they feel the same spark they felt when they first started dating. Don't miss this. Click the link below in the show notes to learn more.
And also making sure the transitions that happen are gradual, that, it's really hard to go from summer schedule of not having to go to bed on time and sleeping in and sleeping till whenever you want. If you can help your kids out, either you start the week before or you just rip the Band-Aid off and do it, but stay consistent with those schedules, stay consistent with the routine, and know that it's coming, but help ease into it as much as possible, and know that don't expect perfection the first couple of days, or even the first couple of weeks, but gradual transitions are really what we're shooting for. And even starting to talk about the school year in as much advancement as possible. If we're coming up on the school year, we're approaching it pretty rapidly. When you go back to Walmart and it's the July 5th and all of the summer stuff is put away and all the school stuff is out and you still have 6 months of summer. If your kid is one that is a little more anxious and a little more tends to lean towards anxiety a little bit more, start talking about, how exciting school can be. Share personal stories with them of maybe times where you felt a little bit uneasy about school, but were successful in overcoming it. It's a great way to ease them back into it, get their mind open to the idea of we're going back to school, this is happening, this is what we can expect. And yes, there is some uneasiness, there is some anxieties, and it's going to be okay. It can be really helpful. The other thing that can be incredibly helpful is creating a supportive environment for the kids as well as for you as a parent, but particularly for the kids, right? Being able to draw on resources that are beyond you as a parent, right? Maybe that's friends, maybe that's bus drivers, maybe that's people at school, part of the school staff. Creating some space for your child to express those emotions, express frustration and sadness or anxieties, but then also being able to create that environment in which they feel like they have somebody to talk to is really, really important. And keeping that open communication, whether they're, you're down on the floor playing farm animals with them, or whether you're driving in the car to drop them off before they go to work. Whatever age group you're at, making sure that you're developing that open communication is really important, and making sure that it's age appropriate. So when our anxiety comes from our nervous system getting really haywire, and when our nervous system gets really dysregulated, and our nervous system, our fight, flight, freeze response starts to go off, we have to be able to learn how to regulate it and to cope with that, so that we can bring more relaxation. And I'm not talking relaxation like we're on a beach, we have nowhere to be, and we're falling asleep. but we want to be able to regulate it back to normal, right? So I always think of like a heart monitor, right? And when you see it beat and you go up and down, right? Like this is what's happening all the time, and we want to kind of bring it back to level. And when the anxiety goes up, how do we bring it down? And when it goes too low, like we don't care at all, how do we bring it back up? How do we regulate that? And how do we keep it right there in the middle with maybe some smaller spikes up and down? And so learning how to manage that anxiety, it's not keeping our kids from ever feeling anxiety, but it's teaching them how to manage it. Teaching them that it's okay to have the emotions, it's okay to feel frustrated, it's okay to feel sad, it's okay to feel anxious, it's okay to have worries, but what do we do with them, and how do we manage our own nervous system? So lots of skills, right? I've already mentioned journaling and things like that to try and identify triggers. Those can be really helpful. That can also be helpful in the soothing aspect of things. But other things can be deep breaths. It can be mindfulness activities. It could be grounding techniques, even something small that's kind of distracting your nervous system, distracting your brain, as far as like eating something, right? Popping a raisin in your mouth, or eating a granola bar, or whatever's around. If you can find something to eat, your brain kind of comes online and says, oh, well, I'm not being chased by a dinosaur right now, so I can eat. I can enjoy this. What does it feel like? What does it taste like? It helps regulate that nervous system without having to think about it too hard. So any of those, again, can be really helpful. And we have lots of different breathing techniques and mindfulness techniques and relaxation exercises that are in our podcast. So if you have questions about specific ones of those, I encourage you to reach out to me or check out the other episodes in our podcast to look for those specific skills. But helping them increase those coping skills is really important. And they can use them at home, they can use them at school, they can use them at work when they grow up, like all sorts of things. Coping skills are never a bad thing to learn how to use. The other thing I mentioned was collaborating with your school staff, with your kids' school staff. And so if your kid is still struggling, particularly after about 2 or 3 weeks of being in school and being in the same routine, that's typically when you want to, that goes kind of beyond the normal realm of things. And so you'll want to start to include your child's teacher or teachers and other school staff that they might interact with that might be able to step in and help. School counselors, if they're old enough to have counselors at school, can be very helpful in these moments as well, but getting on it sooner rather than later. Don't wait until halfway through the school year when your child had been suffering with it for 6 weeks or 6 months. Making sure that you get on it sooner rather than later can be really, really helpful. And the best place to start in elementary school, if they only have one teacher, is with their teacher specifically. And if you're not getting a response from your teacher, and talking to school administrative or to a school counselor can be really helpful. If none of them are responding to you, there is definitely higher ups that you can go to, district office, things like that. But particularly in our Cache County School District, our teachers here are amazing. And most of those teachers are incredibly responsive and are more than willing to help your kid be successful at school. So most of them really want to help, and most of the time you don't need to go higher up than just your teacher at school, but really advocating for your child in the support that they need. In higher education, high schools, middle schools, sometimes they do get lost in the shuffle a little bit just because numbers increase significantly and changeover increases significantly as well. And so making sure that you are advocating, that you're helping your child advocate for themselves, going to the counselor. Where do I go? Where do I turn? How do I say that I'm struggling? What support is necessary can be helpful. The other thing too is kind of monitoring positive social interactions and making sure positive social interactions are happening. So when they are at school, that they're having positive experiences as much as possible. You being able to manage that, talking about it when they come home, what great things happened today, not just avoiding the negative. What are 3 bad things that happened and what are 3 good things that have happened, and talking through all of them. And being able to be supportive of both the negative and the positive, and maybe putting a little bit more influence or spending a little bit more time on the positive things can be a way of really helping kids adjust and creating that supportive, positive environment. I mentioned earlier talking about telling them stories. Kids love stories, and they love to hear about, when you were a kid, how did you do this, or what happened to you, or tell me about you when you were a kid. Just this summer, my nephews were visiting, and he's 15, and he was like, tell me about my mom when she was a kid, and tell me what did she used to do, and things like that. Kids love to hear about their parents growing up and let into that world a little bit. And so making sure that you're saying, this wasn't easy for me, or this is what I was so concerned about, or hey, this is how I used to study. This is how, when I was in AP classes, or when I was studying math, this is what I did. And so helping share some of those things, they're not going to ask for that. And so finding ways to be supportive, particularly around whatever they might be anxious about, can be really helpful in them knowing okay, I can do it. They did it. It's a lot easier to have the confidence that you can do it if you know someone else has also done it. Making sure that the participation that they have in extracurricular activities is a positive one. Obviously, we can't control every aspect of their lives, but being able to control what you can control, right? If there's a particular environment or a particular team that isn't doing well for your child's mental health, then taking inventory of that and making sure that the proper things are either put in place to create safety there, or unenrolling them, or not sending them, pushing them too far out of their comfort zone keeps their nervous system so dysregulated that then they don't find success in those environments, and then they don't want to go back to them. So finding ways to keep them as managed in that normal range of anxiety as possible is really helpful. Something that I always also like to encourage parents is to monitor and adjust support where needed. And what I mean by that is really checking in. If your child is going to be struggling with anxiety, you're sending them and they're a little bit concerned, monitoring that with them, with their teachers, checking in with, hey, how did they do today? This is what they're telling me, it was the worst day ever. But I'm not seeing that at home. What are you seeing? Did you see this happen? Being able to monitor that and doing that in an efficient way, and doing it sooner at the beginning of the year rather than, again, waiting until too far into the school year to really help get them support. And then it changing and adjusting, knowing that, okay, we set this up, or we're doing this routine, or we're checking in this way, but how's it going? Doesn't really seem to be working. Still don't have a lot of the questions that I have answered. So how do we do this differently? Continuing to check in and monitor and adjust as needed is really helpful. And being able to really monitor or be a model for your kids of adjusting, not just freaking out when things aren't working, can be really helpful in helping give them a model of how to get through life, because there's going to be unexpected things that happen. There's going to be worrisome things that happen, and how do we continually adjust in our lives so that we can continue to learn and we don't have to freak out about it or fly off the rails. There's a lot of information. There's a lot of things to think about, and I hope that you can help your child have a successful school year in this upcoming school year. There's a lot of anxiety for parents, for kids, for teachers, for bus drivers, for social networking. There's a lot of anxiety that happens when we start a new school year, and it's exciting and it's fun, and it can also be really scary for kids. So making sure that you're monitoring kind of behaviors and noticing anything that might be different. And if you do find that maybe something feels a little out of my realm and I'm not quite sure what to do, I would highly encourage you to reach out to support. Us here at Cache Valley Counseling have seen a lot of kids with a lot of different anxieties, but mostly around school, friends, academic pressures, need to be perfect. Those are things that we often see a lot with kids. In the last couple of years, those have been kind of highlights of the type of clientele, like teenage clientele and kid clientele that we've seen, and we've had a lot of success with helping people through that. So don't hesitate to reach out is my point there. Don't hesitate to reach out. You don't have to do it alone, and you don't have to be an expert. Just because you are their parent doesn't mean that you have to be the expert and know how to handle it. So reach out. There's lots of great resources out there. And I hope that all of you and all your kids have a wonderful, successful school year. And thank you for listening to the Puzzle of Us podcast. I've been your host, Chelsea Petersen, and we will catch you next time.